Thank you, everyone, for returning so timely. We'll now hear from our CAO, Ian Watson, on the proposed 2025 budgets from external resources, including regional services. Welcome back, Ian.
Super, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to members of council. We can probably I'm hoping we can zip through this fairly quickly. I'm seeing a fair degree of enthusiasm for zipping along through this fairly quickly, largely because these budgets have been approved at various stages already, right? These are police, fire, library, etc. So we'll take a peek for sure, invite questions perhaps at the end, and then be able to move on to Krista's section of discussion, which I want to make sure we have time for. So if we zip ahead to police being the first, I'll just invite your review of the overall here. Starting with the red section, they have a total shared operating budget of 8.8, and then note that they have reported a $306,000 increase this year, less a second year prior year surplus of 194 for a net budget of 8.599. Now the municipality's share here is 60 point. Now this is impressive. 60.2540% of the total police budget is allocated to Quispamsis on the basis of both population and road kilometers. That's the formula that's used for the police service, which really results in overall a net increase of 1.33% for Quispamsis for police, resulting in the town budget for policing services of 5.2. Moving on to fire. As for police, we'll start with the red sections. They have a total shared operating budget of $7 million, up $571,000, or an 8% increase. However, they had a very modest second prior. I really have difficulty with that. Second prior year surplus of 62,000, or almost 63,000, and that gives them a total net operating budget of 508. Total net operating budget. Total net increase of 508,262. You'll note there is a significant decrease in capital for 2025 in the fire service, and that's a consequence of them having no required vehicles this coming year or facility capital expectations. Their capital requirements in 2025 are limited to equipment, and it's vehicle extrication equipment that does have carry a capital cost to it. And it is planned replacement of that equipment that they currently hold. So for fire, they are up 80,000 or 1.94% for a total Quispamsis cost of 4.2 million. Going to the library, you'll notice a 7% increase, but that's been offset by a second prior year surplus of 24,440, resulting in a net budget of 246,822. This budget is split strictly on population, so Quispamsis is responsible for just over 60%. And our share is 168,496, which is actually down 2.53% from last year. I know. There are good things happening. Now, moving on to the Regional Service Commission. So what we wanted to do here is make sure that Council sees the breakdown of the overall FRSC expenses as shown in their most recent budget proposal. And specifically, you'll see just over $100,000 in expenses specific within the FRSC. So that's staffing, lease, office expenses, projects undertaken by the Commission overall. That's the first bubble, and it's 15,800 above last year, 15,864 above last year. Then our payment, next bubble over, is our payment to Envision St. John, which flows through FRSC. That's 213,381. That's a contract amount, so there was no surprise to that one. And then plus 716,044 for the Regional Facilities Commission, which again flows through the FRSC, and that's up 34,318 from last year. That all adds up to a total commitment for Quispamsis of just over $1 million. I would offer, though, that this is not where the FRSC started with their budgeting process. There were a number of iterations of the FRSC budget that got to a final stage. Initially, our increase was in the order of $138,000, so over the course of several iterations of that budgeting process, that's been pared down through discussions with the leadership at FRSC, as well as with their board and with the CEOs of participating municipalities. Hopping on to waste management, and we will have time for questions for sure, but I'll hop on to waste management, where I would cattily say that there's a mixed bag of results. Garbage collection is down approximately 5% from last year. However, tipping fees are up 8.8%. The cost of providing town dumpsters has increased almost 20% to $53,200, but removal of curbside recycling from the budget largely offsets these increases. So it truly is a mixed bag in waste management for 2025, but what we're seeing is a budgeting only on $11,863 increase for 2025 for a total contribution of $1.55 million. Moving to public transit, this is a pretty straight split, shared 50-50, the actual service delivery of the COMEX, and in accordance with St. John's estimates for transit in 2025, up 5% to our new share of $80,259. And next is civic relations sponsorships and grants. As discussed at the October 15th council meeting, the overall allocation here is $66,261, which is $3,952 higher than 2024. So maybe I'll pause there, and then I've just got a couple more slides after that. But if there are questions about those budgets, I'd be happy to entertain those, and then we can just wrap it up and then turn it over to Krista.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. And if anyone has any questions on the external budget, welcome to take those. Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sure it's no surprise that I'm going to comment on this. I'm just trying to find where the breakdown is. Can anyone direct me to the breakdown of the civic in our booklet, just so I can refer to it? Yeah.
For you, your mayor, the civic relations is on page 33.
Thank you. So I just have, I guess, one question, or a comment and a question. So, you know, I did share my concern about, you know, kind of how we delve out some of our grants. And I guess I want to acknowledge it's from the lens of someone that has applied for grants professionally as well as giving out grants professionally. So I really struggle with us not having a more formalized rubric so that we can go back to people and be very transparent about how we make decisions. With that said, you know, I guess early today we talked about our mission, and I pulled out a few things: engage, connected residents, vision, active community, natural beauty, quality of life. You know, as part of the community development budget, we're asked for $183,000 for the Ham River Trail. And I guess I go back to, you know, what the intention of the grants are. And I am going to, I guess, request the KV Trail Builders came to council. It's a not-for-profit group made up of a significant number of Quispamsis residents. And they do a lot of amazing volunteer work in the Shady Grove Trail, which is not ours, but people think it is ours, so we do get the credit. And it is an amazing resource. And I mean, my bias, I'll be very honest, I don't use the Shady Grove Trail, so it's not a personal thing. But I do hear from numerous residents the value of that trail. I know that they were asking for fairly small, $5,200. I'm not saying we have to give it all, but they were looking for support in terms of tools and equipment and things like that to improve that, which again, I go back to our mission and vision of active community, quality of life, natural beauty. And, you know, this organization is helping, and I know we do our own trail development, but it is something that brings people to our community, and they are doing a fabulous job. You know, and I guess I look at, you know, where we have put our money, and I will bring up again, I'm not sure if people are aware that, again, we are giving over $200,000 to Envision, and Envision does have a Dalhousie medical grant program that they are also giving out. So I kind of feel like we're double dipping by also giving additional money to the New Brunswick Medical Education Foundation for the same kind of scenario. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because I do feel, you know, they submitted it, they presented to council, they met all the criteria, unlike some of the other applications that were incomplete. And I would, I guess, ask council to consider maybe throwing them a bone in terms of thanking this not-for-profit that does work very hard in our community to improve that Shady Grove Trail. And I know it's not ours, but a lot of Quispamsis residents, see great value in that and get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Would you like me to?
Your worship, through you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Luck. I would just offer just a couple of overarching thoughts because I appreciate the concern. And I think I also want to be sure that we respect council's direction in this matter to date. Council, by virtue of the Finance Committee, has reviewed the applications and has considered the pros and cons of all the applications, those that met all criteria, those that did not. And recognizing that there are other factors that do influence a decision with respect to funding than above and beyond the threshold of having met documentation requirements. And I would want to make sure that we respect that. That said, I am certainly open to council's direction on revisiting the policy or the rubric that guides those decisions. Recognizing though that council also said that that was not their decision for that review to happen at this time. That said, there's mechanisms for us to undertake that in calendar 2025 that would respect council's decisions. And so, I think one could envision a 2025 application in a slightly different way than what we have seen in this fiscal year. So I would certainly invite other comment about that, but that would be my take.
If I could add to that, the other thing that I looked at was to say that we have a branch of our staff who actually look after our town trails. They are union staff typically, and to be issuing money for something that we are already providing for our residents, to me, I think it's somewhat counterproductive. I know it's a wonderful, beautiful addition, and yes, I have walked there. And as I say, it's a great asset for as long as it is able to exist. But we did feel that we already provide this service and that we wouldn't want to slight our own staff who are already providing this for us under the direction of our Community Services Director, Ms. Burton-Dixon. Thank you.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Scarb.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll try to pull this a little bit closer. Is that better? Just along that same vein, I've reviewed this several times on the civic relation, the grants. And we do have criteria. I found it on our website. It's called the Community Grant Program. And it sets out the guidelines. And it's the number one, the town requires all submissions to include the required documentation and complete the attached application form. Part B, no applicant is guaranteed funding. So that just eased my mind to say that we already have guidelines in place for applications, and it's very clear in our guidelines that the application must be complete. So we have a couple that the application they were either late or there was something missing from the submission and they've been added in. So my amendment the last meeting was to remove those ones that didn't meet the criteria and go ahead with the ones that did, that the Finance Committee had approved. I think it was, I can't remember which ones they approved now. The education, medical education, Hammond River angling. So there were two that were not. So my suggestion would be that we follow our own guidelines and remove those two from the list.
When we looked at the YMCA, that is a new facility. There were no documents created at this point because it had only been open for about 4 weeks from the time that this budget process had begun. So I think it would be unfair to remove that. They are a regional partner. They have provided wonderful services for children and families within this community. And the basis of accepting their incomplete or late request was because they were just opening their doors, and that they recognized that there were some areas that that this assistance would help them in, that this grant would help them in, to the tune of $3,000. I would hate to see us walk away from, on a $35 million budget, walk away from not assisting the YMCA of Greater St. John, who provides so much more to families. And, you know, it goes way beyond a child care facility. It's also helping newcomers at their facility in St. John. They provide language assistance and so on. Like, it's a very broad umbrella, and this is just one very small piece. And we did not feel that this was going to provide a huge impact. And by saying that they didn't fulfill the requirements, they couldn't fulfill the requirements under the circumstances, because they had only just opened up. So I would be encouraging, or I would like to encourage everyone here to accept this $3,000 grant to the YMCA. I will go now to Councillor Bigger, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to quickly say that it seems as though the criteria that we have, as the Deputy Mayor points out, is a criteria for application. But perhaps Councillor Luck, and I, not to put words in her mouth, but it seems that Councillor Luck has a concern about not so much the application criteria, but rather the criteria related to determining the actual adjudication of grants. Like her, but in a different way, as an artist, I have also been on both the application end of many, many grants that have supported my work as a musician, and I've worked as a jury member on a number of grants related to things like the Junos and ECMAs and things like that, Music New Brunswick. And merit is a hard thing to figure out. And I just want to say, this is the third time now that we're having a discussion about this. And it seems that clearly there's an uncomfortable sense that, you know, about the means by which this is accomplished, the means by which this is determined. There are numerous applications I've submitted where I was certain that I was in line to be funded, and only to get feedback that it was based on the submissions that were brought in and the determinations that had to be made around the region, around growth in people's artistic careers and so on, that it just wasn't the right time for me. And I've taken the bad with the good and said, well, that's how it goes. And nobody, I don't think that we just, you know, feed a bunch of numbers into the transmogrifier and let it churn and pump something out the other end and say, there's our answer. If that was the case, then I don't see why any adjudication has to take place at all. It seems like it could just be turned into a computer program and we could all save ourselves a bunch of trouble. At some point, we as stewards of community development make determinations, whether it's inside the Joint Finance Committee, and maybe that's the rub, is that it's being sort of determined not with the entirety of council as a whole. Maybe that's what's got to change going forward. But as it stands currently, and I think our treasurer has kind of confirmed this as well, the process, a determination is made, an adjudication is made based on not just the hard numbers of, and the crossing of T's and dotting of I's of an application, but an adjudication is made based on, as the stewards of development for the town, what do we believe is the right thing at this moment for the town? And it might mean that one applicant, it's not their year. The same way it's many times been not my turn for funding on my music career. Doesn't mean that I felt that I wasn't worthy of it. And it doesn't mean I'm not worthy of it. It's just that in that comparative process where there's only so many dollars to go around, those are the determinations that were made. So I would suggest that we consider moving forward with this the way it is. And if we want to make changes to the process, then that's certainly a reasonable consideration for us to, discussion for us to have. But I don't think doubling back, tripling back on this is a good use of our time currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bigger. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'll be quick. I would just, in an essence of time and that, I would say for those three that people do have an issue with, have it on the agenda for next Tuesday's council meeting. Have the information sent to them. If you want to do a one-off vote on each of them, then just get it over with, because we're not going to get it done here today. So that's, I mean, we have added things in the past, whether it's oldies, whatever, but just everybody get the stuff and then everybody vote. And then if that's what they wish, but that way we're not going to spend another hour talking. We got a $35 million budget, right? So, and we're talking about $3,000. And I'm not saying that that's insignificant for those groups, but let's just do it on the Tuesday. 3 items, vote, go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Worship. And I agree. To be honest, I have no issues, like, in terms of if we want to vote on it next week. I guess the fact that it keeps coming up, I do think that we need to reflect on, there is criteria. And personally, I would like to see a bit more transparency in terms of a rubric so that everyone that's looking at it takes those criteria. Because again, it's quite subjective, and I think there just needs to be more transparency. And I think if there's more transparency, we wouldn't be returning a third time to have this discussion, because it would be very clear how the decisions are being made. So I think having a bit more detail in terms of the process moving forward would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a process, and if we do have a rubric and there are check boxes and everybody gets a check, they've followed everything, they've done everything, there still has to be.
Grading. It's not just a checkbox. It would be.
We won't argue that now. We'll go on to the next speaker. Councillor Olson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have any problems with the process that we have now, and I support the recommendations of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. Deputy Mayor Scar.
Yes, Your Worship. My question's about the Fundy Regional Service Commission, if we may. Is everybody okay if I move on? So I just wanted to make sure I understand this. Regional Service Commission, we're up 107,000. Did you say it's a 15% increase?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Deputy Mayor Schreier. There's that first bubble
Right.
of 107,610 represents the corporate FRSC specific increase. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
that kind of the lease, the staffing, the building, the infrastructure of the FRSC itself. Then we add that with Envision's the contribution to Envision and the contribution to Regional Facilities Commission for a total FRSC contribution of just over 1 million.
And of that, so what is ours up? Are we the 90,000? Are we paying an extra 90,000
Yes.
this year? For all of these?
Yes, correct. That's the total FRSC contribution is 1.037 million. That's
Yeah.
an increase of 90,178 or 10% over last.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I don't see any further comments to be made. So back to you, Mr. Watson.
Super, thanks. Happy to wrap it up, actually. Just a couple of slides, and we'll go right to this one. And no, we're good if you want to hop over, Chrissy. A slide that you have all seen before, but that I'm going to take you back to again now. The budget, like most things, and like we've been talking about throughout the day today, is all about balance. And I'm just introducing a pause in our conversation this afternoon before Krista gets started to just remind us all about the balance we're trying to achieve. It's a balance between growth and restraint. It's a balance between recreational spaces and roads and streets. It's a balance between planned spending and saving for a rainy day. It's a balance between using available funds that we have today and borrowing where appropriate. But perhaps most fundamentally, I would characterize our situation as a balance between short and long term. And it would be my recommendation, our recommendation, to keep our eye on the longer term, on the legacy that you can provide to the town of Quispamsis by recognizing the value of strategic investments that continue to build on our success and that pave the way for continued and sustainable growth. It kind of feels like the right time to just revisit the mission again, where we say a forward-thinking commitment to sustainable growth, which a very different approach to thinking than an annual view to revenues and expenditures. So we appreciate there's also a balance in timing, and the timing here is a little wonky where we don't have our tax assessment and revenues to counter the recommended expenses that we've presented here today. However, it does present us the opportunity to discuss our proposed spending in 2025, making the assumption that our tax revenues will in fact cover what we're expecting here. So as I mentioned a bit earlier, if tax revenues are higher than our projection, we recognize the importance of coming back together in open session to determine the best disposition for those additional funds. And whether that's an increase in roads and streets, or whether that's recognizing the longer haul and talking about allocating some of those extra funds to reserve, is another important chapter of our budget conversation for sure. But what we're seeking today is your endorsement and support for the expenses that we envision for 2025. It's a challenge I know you're up to. I know we're up for it too. And I would just offer, again, before turning it over to Krista, thanks to Krista and her team and to staff. They've been absolutely amazing, as have you throughout our deliberations today. So thanks for your time, and certainly welcome any final questions before I turn it over to Krista.
Anything else for Mr. Watson before he takes his seat? Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're now going back to our treasurer, Krista Brandon, for the final 2025 budget summary and comments. Thank you, Krista.
Excuse me. So I hope we can make through this. So budget 2025, what does this all mean? So good afternoon, your worship, deputy mayor, council, staff, and those watching online. So today is a accumulation of a lot of hard work and a lot of effort by a lot of staff within our organization and members of council and finance committee. I want to thank everyone who's had a role in getting us to today. I thank our finance committee. I thank my fellow executive team members, the management team, and my staff for all their support and assistance. So I'm especially thankful to our accountants, Leah Este and Jackie Mellinson, who are both in the audience there today, who've put in a huge amount of time and effort into pulling this budget before you today. When we presented the draft budget to Finance Committee earlier this month, we had to make some assumptions and some estimates. And in this version in front of you, as our CAO has indicated, we are still having to estimate our assessment numbers, as we won't have that information until the new provincial cabinet is sworn in. So the draft budget we initially presented to Finance Committee on October 3rd had the tax rate remaining the same and the tax base increasing by 3%. This proposed budget now in front of you has our residential tax rate still staying the same at the 1.2777 and our assessment base increasing by 4%. So let's start by reviewing the general fund budget. So this budget, like prior budgets, is a budget attempting to balance a variety of different priorities. But for the most part, it's a maintenance year budget. And we've heard that throughout today. So we continue to experience some inflationary and some supply chain challenges while still wanting to continue to maintain our levels of service. So the total budget is just over $35.6 million, which is an increase of over 2024 of about $1.17 million or 3.39%. So we are estimating an increase of 4% in the assessment, but we'll need to come back to council once we receive our actual assessment numbers. So our average housing price is now projected to be $381,668, which is a significant increase over prior year's average prices. But this was anticipated, maybe not to this extent, but it was anticipated given the last few years of large assessment increases as the system was adjusted to the market. So with our tax rate staying the same at this point in time, most homeowners will still see an increase to their property taxes. And with the 10% cap currently in place, it leads us to be unsure about the exact increase that residents are going to receive, but at this time, it'll all be from assessment and not because of our tax rate. So the next slide has our assessment numbers over the last 10 years. And at this point in time, the 2025 numbers are proposed only. Our assessment base has increased by 57.26% since 2016. And is in correlation with the increased average house price. And our tax rate has increased by 0.0077. On the next slide, it just shows the assessment-based growth just reflected in a graph. And our assessment growth had been minimal between 2015 and 2021. And then over the last few years, we have seen between 9 and 13% growth as assessments were catching up to the market. And we have estimated it at 4% for 2025. But we don't anticipate the full double-digit assessment increases to continue for much longer. The next slide, just a minute, please. So the next slide shows our Canada Community Building Fund, or previously known as the gas tax. And this is our most significant grant that we receive. So our funding for 2024 to 2028 will be about it will be $6,998,403, which is $483,490 more than our last 5-year program. And we will be coming. We will be coming to council in the next few months to bring forward our 2024 to 2028 capital investment plan, which will highlight the projects that we're applying this funding to, and which we have included in our current 5-year capital plan at this time. So of that funding, we are putting about 28% of that funding towards our street capital. And we are directing 72% of the funding into our utility fund. So here's our next slide, shows our spending, our CCBF spending trend graph. And again, due to utility infrastructure replacement demands, the current need for water in areas, and no other significant grant funding, that's why we've allocated this 72% of the funds to our utility fund. In 2023, the CCBF amount that we had in the general fund was not spent due to the postponement of the street capital program. So we did budget for those funds to be applied into the 2024 street program, and they will be. So the next slide talks about our fiscal services. So our current practice is only to borrow for street capital, as these assets have a very long useful life, and by borrowing it, it spreads the cost out over the 15 years rather than being paid as our pay-as-you-go or current funding from our operating budget. So the blue line represents our debt service cost, and the green line is the ratio. Our current debt ratio for 2025 is estimated to be about 6%, but it will increase to about 7.9% by 2030. With additional borrowing projected between 3 and 5 million each year for street capital over the next 5 years, as well as we have some planned borrowing for some of the facility upgrades that are included in our 5-year capital plan. One of those pieces also includes another ice service at the Qplex in 2029, and we also reflect our current Qplex debenture being paid off in 2027. So interest rates are currently stabilizing. We've seen a decrease come forward this week from the Bank of Canada, but we've used the interest rate of of 5% in our projections, and we use this as it's in alignment with our latest current debentures. And important again to note that we do have a 20% maximum debt ratio in our general fund. So here's just our fiscal services in dollars now. So this is again where we record our long-term debt and our interest charges, as well as our transfers to reserves and our transfers to our capital fund. The increase in our debt service cost is the anticipated borrowing for our 2024 street capital. So we have slightly decreased our transfers to reserve in 2025 as compared to 2024. And as we've heard throughout today, our asset management plan calls for long-term financial planning, and consistently adding to our reserves helps support this strategic direction. And you will notice in our current 5-year capital plan, I have projected or planned to use a significant amount of reserves to fund various capital items. So again, in order to do this, we need to be able to grow our reserves when our assessment is high and use them when the assessment is low. And I'll just point you to years specifically 2025, 2027, and 2029 in our general 5-year capital plan. Here's a very full slide, but this is just the detailed information on our long-term debt. And you can see that even with significant borrowing coming up for the next few years, we have room for this, as again, I've spoken about the Qplex debenture dropping off in 2027. So there will be opportunities as part of our strategic plan implementation to allow us to refocus these funds, and that's what we've tried to do in our current 5-year plan. The next slide points to our reserve funds. So our general operating reserve fund is budgeted to increase to 1.18 million. We could go up to as much as 1.72 million, which is 5% of our prior year budgeted expenses. But with how the Fundy Regional Service Commission capital on the regional facilities will work, I want to make sure that I leave enough room to be able to put some funds in there at the end of the year for any of the capital projects that we budgeted for that they haven't spent, because they do have 2 years to spend that money. Our general capital reserve is increasing by $773,000 by the end of 2025, with again significant amounts set to come out of the reserve for future capital expenditures. So again, I'll point you to our 5-year general capital budget. So having healthy reserves is important, as it enables us to have a level of funding in years of little or no assessment growth while maintaining our service levels. It's about balance, some debt where it makes sense, some saving for the future, and some pay-as-you-go funding. Our utility operating reserve is almost at its maximum capacity, and these funds will remain for any unbudgeted or emergency uses. Our utility capital reserve will be significantly depleted by the end of 2025, as we anticipate finishing some large capital projects that have spanned a few years, and the funding has been sitting in the capital reserve for this purpose. So now we need to focus on building this reserve up again to help us fund any sort of future utility expansion, especially on the water side. We need to have some real long-term strategic discussions and decisions made in the next year or two regarding the expansion of our utility fund, especially as we've heard today related to the water expansion. In order to expand, we will require significant grant funding, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, in order for it to be fiscally possible to complete, as it's very unlikely that our utility customers will be able to bear the cost on their own, as our utility fund is a user pay system. So the next slide, again, just kind of reiterates that we've prepared a balanced budget. Municipalities must always prepare a balanced budget. And we've done this balanced budget with no change to our residential tax rate, but utilizing our estimated growth to help fund these increased costs and to put money away for future costs as we anticipate our assessment increases to level off as it corrects to market. So until our 2025 assessment information is received and analyzed, it just would be advisable to hold off any detailed funding decisions until that time. So at this point, I'll just pause and say if there's any questions on anything related to the general fund.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brandon. If anyone has any comments or questions, please let me know by your light. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Brandon. I guess I'm a little concerned we're borrowing, or proposed to be borrowing, $5.5 million this year, 2.5 and 3. We also have healthy reserves. We're putting in the most we've ever put into reserves into capital. Why aren't we putting, I'll leave the utility on the side because I'm hopeful that we'll get some money, but why wouldn't we take $1 million out of our reserve? I mean, I don't want to get into the details too much, but I'd also had sent a note proposing that we increase the expenses by about 3% to add an extra $1 million, take $1 million, throw that into the debt, or instead of borrowing $3 million. It's just, I know we keep talking about tax rate, and you heard me at the very first. It's easy to keep your debt ratio down when you increase your budget 10% a year. Our assessments will be, my guess, around 11.5 this year. A lot were 18.8 a few years ago, capped at 10. Last year, everybody was over 10, capped at 10. So you've got about 10% flowing over this year, plus the actual. So we're going to get another 10% plus new growth. So I will vote no against another 11% budget increase. And we can talk about our tax rate all the same. It's what we pay is the importance. So we control the budget. I think our total budget right now is very reasonable. I like the 3.3. But I also know we got to save money for later. But it's also, if I've got $100,000 in the bank and I'm going to buy a car that costs $150,000, which would be a really nice car, I'm probably not going to borrow the whole $150,000. I'm going to put some of my money in the bank and save some. So we're building up our reserves. Last year, I know we increased our tax rate by another 2.5 cents just to put more into reserves, because at one point we thought we'd be less. I wasn't at that meeting, but from what I saw, we'd be less around $1 million. We're going to be projected now over $3 million next year and not touching the reserves in that. So I think when you talk about a balanced approach, my personal balanced approach is using a little bit of that as well, saving for the future, but why borrow at 5% and only get 2% on your savings? So I'm okay with increasing the budget even more to put an extra $1 million in there so it goes against the roads. And because if you do a 6% increase, as an example, you take off the new growth, the individual taxpayer is paying about an extra 5% or 4.8, which in today's inflation, still a bit high, but reasonable. We could just go by the assessments and keep the tax rate the same. My projection is everybody pays 10% more. So that's 10 plus 10 plus 10. If we do that, that's 30% over 3 years when the inflation rate's nowhere near that. So I don't really care what the assessments are going to be. I care what our budget is. So I guess I'll leave it at that. We'll see what people think about what should be cut or not cut, but I'm okay with increasing the budget a bit to make sure we pay $1 million that we don't have to borrow for roads. So, because at a 3.3% plus all the growth, let's pretend that everything did stay as we projected, people would only have an increase of about 2% on their taxes. So I've just used my math differently, but thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Anybody else have any comments? I don't see any, Ms. Brandon. Oh,
I was waiting.
Oh.
Okay, somebody else.
Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually wanted to get Councillor Miller just to clarify something. So from what you just said, are you proposing that, I mean, we don't have the assessments yet, but potentially our tax rate would go down even though we're sticking with the same budget? Can you just explain that a little bit? Thanks.
There's two things. One, I don't care about the tax rate or the assessments or the tax rate. I care about what we pay, and we do the budget. So what I was saying is the assessments may not come in now for another 6 weeks, according to what we heard, right? So the assessments, because of what's going on, so our budget has to be in before the assessments come in. Number problem one.
Excuse me, I'm just gonna correct you. From the time the assessments come in, I believe we have 30 days. And I think the government, given
Okay.
it being a new government, will have to stick to that.
Okay, well, again, to me, it doesn't matter what the assessments are. What I'm saying is we control the budget, and the budget controls how much each one of our individual houses, the daycares, the apartments, the businesses, that's what they pay, is what our budget goes up. The assessment is just, the tax rate's just, as I talked about, it's just a calculation. I talked about Edmundston, and guess what? In Edmundston, if your average house is 200,000, ours is 448, you're capped at 10%, theirs can only go up $20,000 a year. We're capped at 10, we go up $40,000 a year. So it's how much we pay is my thing. So my comment was just work on the budget. If somebody wants things added or subtracted, me personally, I'm okay with even increasing the expenditures by another 3% to put $1 million in our bank. So instead of borrowing $3 million on roads, you borrow $2 million on roads, just to keep the debt ratio down.
Thank you. Next, Deputy Mayor Scrier, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I know we've done this before, borrowing money to pave roads, and again, I hear Councillor Miller saying, why are we borrowing money when we have money? So I still worry about that a little bit. But today we had a lot of questions about things that were in the budget, and, you know, questioning whether or not they should, you know, like, are we in agreement that they should stay in the budget? Or are we going to go through certain items that were sort of earmarked today and say, do we need to discuss these further? Whether or not we want to leave them in the budget. If council doesn't think they're a priority at this point, then, and put something else in the budget, then we should be looking at that at this point, I guess. If not, yes, well, we still have more time, but we haven't had that discussion yet. It's been a long day, so we haven't said yay or nay on certain items, or if somebody wanted to discuss further about an item. I guess that's all I'm asking is how the process, how we move forward now. Will we have another meeting regarding individual item lines that people have concerns with? Will we discuss those?
Yeah, we haven't done our assessments.
Ms. Brandon, would you like to respond?
Through you, Your Worship. Yep. Yeah. So again, the plan was for at the end of the day to kind of go back to my kind of taxometer tracking sheet where council by consensus motion would make those motions. And that's typically how we do it when we have all of the assessment and everything. So I believe our plan is still to kind of go through and do that. I'm not sure about maybe today, but at the next few council meetings, potentially, there is going to be a chance for budget discussion and deliberation, because that is the most important part, because that is what will give us the direction, and that is how we will land at our budget.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brandon. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't see any more questions on this part.
Okay.
Just one second, Councillor Miller.
So I guess, how do we want to proceed? Do we want to go, if people have a few line items and talk about that now, or do we want to wait? It's 4 o'clock. Do we want to wait and do it? Because as the mayor has just said, we do have an extension. So if I think people have reiterated kind of what their concerns were throughout the day. So staff won't be surprised if we have a discussion on a couple of things at least. So I don't know, I'm looking at the mayor and our CAO if we just kind of.
Thanks, Your Worship, and through you to members of council. I think there's a couple options right now, and kind of a couple of roads to pick. One would be to stick it out for a little bit and talk about the budget as presented, to settle on the expense side of the shop exclusively, knowing that we still need to see the income piece, and then make a future decision about what to do as a result of that income. Option 2 would be to defer now and have those discussions about the expense side at future council meetings. I have a little bit of a hesitation about that because our council meetings are full, and this is gonna be important work too. And the thought of trying to gather you again for a good block of time in the short term, I think is gonna be really hard. You're all really busy folks. My hope was that at the end of today, there would be a motion to accept the expense side of the budget as presented or as amended, knowing that we then have that piece solid, and then we can talk about, okay, what do we do with the revenue side when we see it? But that's selfish perhaps on my part in the hopes of getting to that level of certainty on our budget for this year.
Thank you. So in moving forward, if we are going to continue going through this portion of the budget, it would, as the CAO has just explained, it's really fresh with everyone right now, and I think with the fact that it is very challenging to get everyone together, because it would take more time than a Tuesday night following or during a council meeting.
Saturday morning.
I didn't hear what he said.
He said he's only got a couple of items to follow through with.
Over with, because we can still change it in the next 2 weeks if we have to. I know it's not ideal, but we can still at least get some things ironed out.
Through your worship too, I still have the utility fund to go through.
Yes, so if you would like to proceed with that, please.
All right,
And that is
so
page
going forward,
page 94. Sorry, Kristen.
sorry. So then our utility fund. So our utility operating fund revenue is proposed to be 4.4 million. And again, we need to ensure the stability of our utility fund by slowly increasing the rates so that we can expand the utility in the future and also pay for all of our current year's expenses. So we have had to increase the rates over the last number of years to fully fund our utility, and this year is no different. So we did take into consideration the petition by residents on the Forester's Cove, the Wildwood wastewater treatment plant, to eliminate the surcharge of 40% that they pay, and we are not recommending any changes at this time. So this is the only area where we need to pay for and provide the lift pumps. And in a user pay system, it makes the most sense to only charge the homeowners who actually need this service, and not all the homeowners, and not all the homeowners on the utility. And when we did take this system over, all the homeowners had agreed to this at this point in time. So the costs for the pumps are increasing, and by using the percentage increase, it ensures that we have the funds available to pay for these pumps when needed. And as Gary's already indicated, we already have had to replace some, and we would not have been able to recoup all of that cost at that point in time. But I would recommend us looking into this further once all the pumps have been replaced to ensure that the 40% surcharge is the adequate number for this service. The next slide talks about our utility expenditures. So the largest expenditure in our utility fund is our pay-as-you-go capital, and then our debt service costs. Our utility assets have long, useful lives, but are very expensive to build. So we are funding 1.12 million of capital spending through our operating fund this year, which is an increase of $206,000. And this reduces our ability to put funds into reserves for future capital projects. So we do see a reduction of almost about $75,000 into our reserves. Next slide on our utility fiscal services. So the debt ratio for utility in 2025 will be 22.01%. And again, we have a 50% maximum debt ratio for this fund. With borrowing planned over the next 5 years, our debt ratio by 2030 is projected to be 35.12%. And again, I will reiterate that, again, we have no known grant funding at this point in time. And in order to make, so that we don't have to go into debt so much, we really do need some 1/3 federal, 1/3 provincial, 1/3 municipal kind of grants to be order to offset these costs related to our expansion of our water and our wastewater, because otherwise it's solely paid by the users of this system. And again, it's important to note that we currently only have 294 water users, right? 294 water users that pay our annual water fixed charge is $279. So there is not a lot of revenue on the water side. We do have 6,024 equivalent users on sewer. So in that respect, the cost can be shared, but again, only having 294 water users is quite low. So then when we talk about our utility rates, again, council should always consider the sustainability of the rates. And we know that we need significant funding in the future for asset management and for any future water expansion. By growing our rates, it helps to provide funding for current, but also for future utility projects. Because again, these utility projects have a long useful life, and it's important to kind of sustain that and build that through. So important to note, this budget was prepared with rate increases of 3.96 on the sewer rates. So that's an increase of $22 annually. 4.1 on the water fixed rate, which is about 11 annually, and 4.1 on the water consumption rates. And these percentages are a little, variable, but again, we always like to have, because we bill quarterly, we always like to be able to divide it over 4. So those are the rates that we are proposing, and you can reference page 35 of your budget package to see those rates in detail. That in summation is our utility fund financing side.
Thank you, Ms. Brandon. There is a motion following, I believe, is there? Yeah. We have that, yeah. Coming next, which is on the budget for both the general and utility fund to be approved as presented. Sure. Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, through you, your worship. The proposed motion was included in your e-scribe agenda, and it reads, be it resolved that the town of Quispamsis 2025 proposed budget for both the general and utility fund be approved as presented or as amended on October the 25th, 2024, as part of the budgeting process, and in recognition that final approval of the overall town budget remains conditional upon sufficient tax assessment revenues, which, together with other planned revenue sources, fund at least 100% of these budgeted expenses, and formal approval of the entire budget, including these budgeted expenses, occurs within 30 days of receipt of tax assessment revenues.
Thank you, Kathy. It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Bigger. On the question, Deputy Mayor Schreier?
Just on the question, so the way I read this motion, it doesn't give us, except for sufficient tax assessment revenues, it doesn't give us any flexibility to have further discussion on what stays in. I'm just saying, according to the motion, it doesn't, if you want to correct me on that, the clerk does?
If you'd like to discuss the motion now, you may on the question.
So we're going to we're staying and we're going to
We're going to
discuss
stay, yes.
oh,
Yes.
okay, great. So on the question, I just wanted to make sure on that. So I do have a few things that I was wondering about. I know that there was a lot of discussion about the oh, goodness. No, no. We were talking about the new playground on Donlin. Cedar Ridge, sorry, and there was quite a bit of conversation on that, about the total cost of what Cedar Ridge would be, and should we be looking at doing that as a phase-in? We seem to have two major projects in community services, one being Hammond River and the other being Cedar Ridge. Plus, we have some big dollars going towards water or paving and things like that. So I just wanted to get a sense from my colleagues. I would like to see we either do one or the other, or we do a phased-in approach of Cedar Ridge. I believe the total amount was 500 and change?
544.
544.
That's not the total.
So,
It's more.
yeah, it's more than 700,000. And we do, I believe, Dana Purton-Dixon mentioned that we have X amount of number. I don't have all the notes in front of me now because we've been flipping. How many actual
21.
centers we have, or playgrounds we have in the town? 22, 10? So,
Beans right there.
so anyway, I would like to see us look at maybe a more phased-in approach for that. We've got a big decision to talk about, like on paving, and I know it's separate budget, utility and water is separate, but it's all coming out of one person's pocket, which is the resident. So that was one concern I had, was on what we're going to do with that. As I'd mentioned before, I think everything that was maintenance is fine. The maintenance, the things that need to be done, drainage, all those things are good to go. But I would like to really think about new projects and if we want to go there right now, or do we want to concentrate on one big project for the town? Those are just my concerns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Spryer. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and to be quite honest, that's really the only major one on my list right now, is can that be even scaled down? I think Councillor Bigger showed me, because I was trying to find the original presentation, I think the two shade places are like 125K, right? So nice, but it's a playground. Like, we got trees, we got different stuff there. So I think not just a phased approach, I'm thinking even if we reduce the amount, at least then staff has a direction saying we're willing to pay, and I'm just picking a number. It is a new spot, it needs to get done. A regular one without land and has been there was like 250. So are you okay spending, I'm just picking a number, 500K total for it, or 600K, or whatever the number is? That way it gives staff something, to look at. They know exactly what each thing costs. They know if they had to swap something out. It's, we do have 10 different playgrounds, right, for sure. I don't think you'd want to build all of them like this, for sure. But it's, in theory, I'm okay with having one super nice one somewhere, for sure. But is this a bit too much? And again, what you do this year, whether it goes over 3 years, to Deputy Mayor's point, is I'm okay with that too. So whatever council decides, because to be honest, the other things on my list, I can do with. I'm good. It's just this one. I mean, the tax rate's a whole different discussion, but we're just talking expenditures right now.
So in your discussion, however, I think Ms. Purton-Dixon would like to have definitive direction on what you are asking for. I'll go now to Councillor Bigger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, and to that point, and bearing in mind, it's not probably fair to just say, hey, change this and not give any direction on that basis at all or whatever. This is the singular thing for me too, in terms of my concerns about expenditures. As I'll just reiterate, I'm not entirely sure that the data for the demographics of the neighborhood, even as they're referenced in the recreation master plan, quite jive with the direction of this. And if it's a matter of boiling down to, well, what's a number that I would be willing to kind of go along with, and everybody kind of has to do that. If that's where we're at, I can live with a cap of $400,000 based on looking at the plan that Mr. Scott put before us some time ago, and looking at the line item expenditures that exist within that. I say that without any certainty about what that actually ends up looking like. So I'm not trying to impose some sense of expertise on it. You know what I mean? I don't have that expertise. Ms. Burton-Dixon and her department have that expertise. But from the comparative standpoint of an overall budget, and bearing in mind what the deputy mayor said, I guess that's kind of probably where I'm at. I'm not so much interested in or not excited about the idea of saying, let's leave this as is cost-wise and design-wise and just phase it in over a longer process. I worry that the demands on us related to other items, once we get moving on them, are going to just be ever present, and there will continue to be end-of-life considerations, obviously in the community services department as well, that are not captured in this budget for this year, of course. So anyway, I'll put that number out there and say, I would say let's get it done to the degree that it can be, or I guess it would have to, obviously, the department would have to go back and review the situation and maybe bring it back to us again. And far be it from me to want to kind of let the air out of the balloon, out of the tires on something like this. But that, for me, would probably be where I could be comfortable, all
Okay,
things considered.
I'm going to go to the next questions and so forth, but again, there need to be definitive boundaries as to, is that 400,000 for this year? Is it over the? So we'll make that in a motion in a moment. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. And I appreciate the concern being raised about Cedar Ridge. It is a large spend. However, I would offer a couple of thoughts, just contextual and not to limit the discussion in any way. But to offer that, again, the expenses that are being proposed to you today are completely funded through a 4% increase in the tax assessment numbers. I think we all are cautiously optimistic that it'll come in significantly higher, well, higher than that. I won't say significantly, but higher than that. So that all to say that it's very unlikely that we would be in a poor position financially to not be able to cover both, all of the things that you've been presented today. Recognizing Cedar Ridge is a bigger project for sure. The other thing I would offer is that this may be one of the, I won't say one of the last times, but it is a unique position to be in for the town right now, by virtue of reasonable growth, tax assessments going, or property values going up, and therefore tax revenues going up. I think, slightly longer term, if we see decrease in immigration, which the federal government has recently talked about, as well as a softening on assessment rates, the environment in which we are operating today may be a little different in next year and the year after, which would arguably further restrict our thinking around what we might consider more discretionary things like this. Personally, I don't see this as discretionary. I think, and I can sense that you don't either. It's a question of scale. And I would offer that the scale that is possible today may be more difficult to achieve in future years, and that we can accommodate the scale that is being proposed today through the 4% that we've talked about. So anyway, just a a balance of the conversation for sure, and welcome further just to refine that number. So to her worship's point, making sure there's clarity for staff.
Thank you, and I was just reminded by the clerk that it would not be a vote on this, it would be by consensus today. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just went back and looked at the original proposal, which makes it a bit better in my head. Phase 2 is talking about BMX parks and everything else, which is, we already have. So to me, I'm gonna ignore that. That's phase 2. I don't think that's, but if I look at the other playgrounds cost us $250, this one's 500 and change, a little bit better. To me, if this is the whole thing, because phase 2 isn't playground. Phase 2 is something different than what we have at every other playground when I'm looking at it. And if you wanna look, I looked at on our e-scribe back to July, whatever date it is. Because phase 2 is the single track trails, wood chip surface, mountain BMX bike. That's kind of like the wow for a playground. So for me, I'm okay with phase 1. I'm not okay with phase 2 because we have a lot of phase 2. So, but this kind of, it's a bit more expensive than our other playgrounds, but it's not as expensive as we think, or it is as expensive as we think. And I have to rephrase, it wasn't a shade thing for $125,000. It was a primary play structure. So there's a big difference between a shade and a primary, a little bit different from a shade, right? Primary play, yeah?
You were throwing shade on it.
I was throwing shade on that. So to me, phase 1 is phase. It's done at phase 1. So I'd be okay with just this and that's it, no BMX park.
Next in line, Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to, I guess, circle back to what CAO Watson had commented on, because I guess in my mind, the reason I'm hesitant about the Cedar Ridge Playground and at that dollar amount is because we have talked about another 500, like a $500,000 bathroom at Gondola Point Beach. We've also talked about expanding our Hammond River Park to be kind of a Rockwood mini. So, you know, if the money is drying up, again, I just wonder, you know, I know we say this is going to be the last potential kick at the can, but, you know, again, I just think it's a fairly big spend and a big project. I definitely agree with Councillor Miller that perhaps we don't have to do phase 2. But again, I also think looking ahead, like we had talked about at the very beginning, kind of, you know, forward thinking and being a bit more strategic and sustainable. You know, if we are thinking about some of those huge costs that, you know, are on our wish list that we really want to, you know, see play out in the future, in the near future, you know, I think that we do have to look at the, I don't want to say grant, like, you know, there's a lot to the playground for a community playground that, you know, really we want connection within that. Like, I do worry that, you know, if we make it too big, it's going to end up drawing other people to the playground, and I don't think that was the intention. It was supposed to be a playground for that subdivision, that community, for community connection. So anyway, I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Luck. Deputy Mayor Squire, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, councillors, for the discussion. I just wanted to get a feel of what people were thinking. And I don't like, I know that we're asking our, Your Worship is saying a definitive answer or direction. I don't want to tie the Director of Community Services hands if you know, if she's, you know, if there's something that she can do to massage the project a bit, or she's just going to say, no, this is what I stand by, and I know that's what you presented, so it probably is. But I don't want it to become something that we're going to end up throwing out the window because we can't agree on what that price should be. That price, and only the Dana Parton Dixon can tell us what that should be. If we say 400,000, you might say, well, if it had been 425, we would have gotten the whole trail system or something else that could have went in the park that was important. But because we tied your hands at 400,000, that's not going to happen. So I just want to be able to give direction, but not with a dollar amount. You know, we could say reducing the budget by a certain percentage, perhaps, something that would allow flexibility and I'd like Dana to be able to come back and give us her thoughts in what she could come up with.
Just
And
for,
just her comments on that.
just for clarity on that, pardon me, that's what drives the budget deliberations are the request for funding and how, and either passing that or giving an alternative. So saying to reduce it by a certain percentage, that again will mean that you will have to readjust your vision of what that play park will look like. So I'm going to go now to Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've clarified my budget to say that the playground be approved as presented, and that is a definitive comment associated with my budget, with my motion. That's the first thing that we've discussed that we wanted to come to some vote on, and we can vote on that individually if you want, or whatever. We might be doing that anyway.
Not a motion, yes, just a
Yeah, well,
consensus.
whatever you want.
So it would not be a vote to council, it would be a request for consensus.
Yes,
So you are asking that that budget remain as presented?
as presented, yeah.
Okay. So Kathy, do I go around now and ask for that?
Perhaps a show
There-
of hands
I
of
still
those who
have,
agree.
Councillor Thompson still has a question. No? Okay. Oh, first, we're going to hear from Director of Community Services.
I just want to make a quick comment, if I could, Your Worship, and I appreciate the discussion on the play space. I realize that that park is integral to that neighborhood, and that there is a lot of interest in that neighborhood and the community and reimagining that space. But we have to consider the budget for that, and I understand that and I appreciate that. I would just like to comment that when we talk about money drying up, I would like to think that we're not going to continue to go to the recreation to make those cuts. I think that would be a very unfortunate move. It happens regularly, and I don't think that's what your residents want you to do. They want us, and if you look at your recreation master plan, they actually want us to change our name and go back to recreation services and to focus our effort on recreation. That's what they want. That's what we were told. And I think it would be remiss of council to continually look to my department to make cuts, especially when they're not needed and we have a budget. I understand you don't appreciate the price, and I can work with that and with some parameters, but I would caution you not to continually go to recreation for cuts. We're an essential service, just like water, roads, and sewer. That's why people move here. And that's my speech. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Burton-Dixon. And with that, we have a Director of Community Services, we have a Director of Engineering and Works, and they are the overseers of their respective divisions within our town offices. And it is from both of these directors that the entire town moves and has motion and you know, as they say, a community of choice. If we are cutting back on certain things, then we have to make sure that it is with good intention and with the idea that it's in the best interest of the entire community. I'll go from there, I guess. Right now, I'm going to ask for a consensus. So Councillor Olson has asked that the budget for Cedar Ridge for this segment remain the same. Councillor Miller. Councillor Bigger.
I'm okay with this.
Councillor Luck. Councillor Thompson, are you okay with phase? Yeah. So it's been approved by all council that phase one of Cedar Ridge Play Park remain through consensus. On the table, it was moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Bigger. Would you like that?
And this is on the operating, because I have a question on the utility wire. So this is, there's two budgets,
That
right?
too.
So this is operation budget?
Utility and,
This is both. It's,
Okay, so.
the motion's on both general and utility.
Okay, so then.
So if you have a
then I-
question about anything.
Yeah, so I have a question, not to change yet, but to have discussion on the washroom, and if it does become cheaper, because Mr. Logier said it might be. So I'm not saying that's $200,000 less you have to borrow. That's all I was saying, like, keep it there, but move it around. And if we have to put everything in this one, my other thing was, if we increase the actual expenditures by 3%, we would actually be able to put $1 million extra in our coffers, but instead of borrowing 3 million, you borrow 2 million. That's, because I'd have to say it now, like, moving the land for public purpose, a whole different discussion for reserves, but this is, if we're talking about managing expenses right now. Because then the average taxpayer would still be paying just less than 5%. Does that make sense? 3% works to like $1,028,000. Give or take. Okay, so if right now, so right now, as is, our budget's going up 3.3 something percent, 3.39 or something like that. And we are borrowing $3 million for roads. We're borrowing, and right now it's going up 3.39%. And for that to be active, we actually have to borrow $3 million for roads. Just for roads, like utilities, a whole different, so $3 million. So which we have a lot of borrowing coming up, which you see in the future, right? So, and that gets back to my conversation, we still got, this will be great, our reserves would still be as is, but if we increase our expenditures by 3%, that adds another $1 million to the overall spending. But take that $1 million, apply it to the roads, and only borrow $2 million versus $3 million. So it's not it just helps your borrowing later on. You've still got your budget has still increased. And when so it's, I think the CAO understands what I'm saying. So, I don't know how to explain it clear, so I need somebody who can speak better than me.
Your worship.
yes, Ms. Brandon, go ahead.
So just to make sure that I understand what Councilor Miller is saying. So on our 2025 capital plan, we have 3 million for borrowing, and we have 3.605 to fund from our operating budget. So that would change to 4.0 or 4.605 for funding from operating by increasing our budget and reducing our borrowing. Correct?
I think so. I think so, exactly, yeah. So we're adding $1 million more for taking
Yes.
and just putting that into, instead of borrowing 3, you borrow 2. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
So, no, so for expenditures, instead of add 3% to our current expenditures. So instead of a budget of expenditures of 3.39, it'll be 6.39. Equals roughly $1 million. Yeah,
And this is on the general fund.
this is on the general, it's on the total.
This is not the.
Your worship,
Go ahead, Ms. Brandon.
just by adding the increased funding to pay-as-you-go or funded from operating, that will thereby increase our expenses by $1 million. The percentage will just fall out, so we'll increase it by $1 million and decrease the borrowing by $1 million.
Whether it's 2.99 or 3.02, yeah. Pardon me? It's a wash, except except we borrow $1 million less, that's, yeah.
Did you have a question, Councillor Thompson?
Yes, your worship. That reduction from our, it's coming out of our what?
Expenses.
No. Where's that $1 million coming from? Sorry, Kirk. Counselor Miller.
It just comes from our operational revenue. So it's basically, because right now,
Operational revenue? We don't have
well,
operational
it's-
revenue.
I don't know how to call it, it's just,
You mean the,
if
the
we would have,
reserves?
if staff would have came and proposed a budget of 6 point whatever, it would have showed at the end that, instead of borrowing 3 million, we'd borrow 2 million.
I know, but where does that million come from?
It gets added on to, because right now we've only got a 3.39% increase to our total budget. This increases your budget to 6.39.
Okay, so then where?
Your worship, through you.
Go ahead.
So in essence, we will be increasing our estimated assessment growth using that funds to increase our contribution to general capital from general operating by $1 million and reducing our borrowing by $1 million. So then I'm just trying to run through the number right now, but in essence, on the sources of changes, which is page 1 of your budget document. So if everyone could go to page 1, I could kind of try and walk you through it here. So halfway down the page, there's a line, proposed capital projects funded from operating. That would go from 3.605. This page. So in essence, that will go from 3.605 to 4.605. And how we would get that money would be by then estimating the increase to our assessment and funding it through that and reducing our borrowing for that year.
So it's the assumption of the assessment, that's where we write it
CAO Watson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you, and I appreciate the conversation, and there's lots of iterations of this, but I think we're saying the same thing. Let me try one more swing at it, and you can tell me if I've got this wrong. We've estimated a certain amount of expense for 2025. We're looking for you to be comfortable with that level of expense, knowing that we don't know yet about our tax revenues. But we're asking you to be comfortable with that level of expense conditional on our tax revenues being sufficient. If tax revenues come back in higher than what we have expected, then then the opportunity is for us to use those additional funds in any way you deem appropriate. You could direct us to borrow less and spend more now. You could direct us to move that extra funds into reserve. You could ask us to take on new projects that aren't even in our budget today. So it's about the use of that additional, I think, it's about the use of those additional funds upon receipt of the tax assessment, which is very likely to be higher than what we estimated. Or, in fairness, or lower the tax rate.
Okay, I understand.
All right.
Want me to read it before you do? Hopefully the clerk does, or not, or what am I?
So the clerk is going to read
Just the consensus.
the consensus.
To make sure I have it right before they, Crystal probably.
Can help with the wording, but the consensus would be by increasing the proposed capital projects from operating from 3,605,000 to 4,605,000 of the assessment base amount, I'm not quite sure about that, and reduce the borrowing by $1 million.
Exactly.
Is that right? Oh, wow.
Ian knows what I'm talking about.
I don't know, that's a little confusing.
I only offer that it might be a tiny bit premature to be sure about how we want to deal with this, because it's about the income side of the equation. and we don't have that detail yet. I would invite the conversation about what to do with those surplus funds, if there are any, when we've got a confirmation about them, as a phase 2 of the conversation. Because right now, it might feel a little hypothetical and still need revision, because we won't know what the scope of scale of that is.
So I'll take out the assessment base amount.
So, Your Worship, through you, I would suggest that that the consensus I've heard so far is for Cedar Ridge to be approved as a one-phase exercise at $544,000. And that is the only amendment that I've heard so far to the expense that we've talked about today. Yeah, and then to your point, Councillor Miller, we will certainly need to come back with you in open session to talk about the income side and what we do as a consequence of that income. So that's a separate conversation once we've received tax assessment information. So I think the only question I'm left with, and I'll certainly invite more, is that are there any other amendments to the proposed expense we have? And I think I heard none, but I certainly welcome the conversation about further.
Thank you. Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not looking to make another amendment. I just want to be clear on, if I vote yes on this budget, that there's still going to be discussion after the fact on the ultimate tax rate. Because if it comes in where the assessments are higher, it doesn't mean that, yay, we have a windfall and we're going to spend it. It might mean that we actually adjust. So as long as I'm clear on voting yes today doesn't mean I'm okay with the tax rate. Yeah, correct? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Squire, please.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify earlier in the conversation, we talked about Tuesday meeting discussing the grants, and I wanted to make sure that that's going to happen on the Tuesday meeting. Thank you.
I believe that at our previous meeting, there was a motion to move for status quo with the sponsorship and grant distribution, and that there was to be no change to this. So it can be brought up next Tuesday?
I think, Your Worship, through you, I might just suggest we table that one for now. That would allow us just to be sure that we're adhering to the decisions that were made and any guidelines in bylaw that we have about returning to the same topic within a certain timeline. I want to be respectful of those decisions, but if we could table it and then agree to come back with the results of our review of what we're able to do within the confines of our current bylaw, I'm happy to do that on Tuesday.
Thank you. So the motion was made by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Bigger.
Well, this is an actual.
This is an actual motion. The consensus was on the 544,000, phase 1.
So this is an actual.
This one is. So I'll read it again. Be it resolved that the Town of Quispamsis 2025 proposed budget for both the general and utility fund be approved as amended on October 25th, 2024, i.e. approve phase 1 of Cedar Ridge Park Playground, $544,000 as part of the budgeting process and in recognition that final approval of the overall town budget remains conditional on, first, sufficient tax assessment revenue which, together with other planned revenue sources, fund at least 100% of these budgeted expenses, and formal approval of the entire budget, including these budgeted expenses, occurs within 30 days of receipt of tax assessment revenues, and table the civic relations budget until Tuesday evening. I think that's November 5th, Kathy. So on the question, we're looking for approval of this portion of this motion, yes. So I don't know if everyone has their iPads with them or not. Okay, please vote now then. Motion carried 7-0. Thank you. Next item. Reports. And those are for information purposes only. And I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for all council, for being here today and putting in such thoughtful planning for attending this meeting and for your contributions. It certainly takes a lot of time, takes some of you away from your daily work, and it's much appreciated. And I'd also like to thank our staff for their many months of hard work and for the diligence and for the care that they put in to creating this budget, because they know how important dollars and cents are to our residents, and they want to continue making Quispamsis a community of choice. So thank you very much to all of our staff, whether they are in this room or online, or perhaps they're out fixing roads or whatever they might be doing, but we all contribute to the betterment of Quispamsis. And now I'm looking for a motion of adjournment. Moved by Councillor Olson.
I would like to also thank Kathy Snow for coming out of retirement to help us.
She's been waiting to get back here.
Seconded by Councillor Thompson. All those in favor of adjournment, please vote now. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Krista. And thank you to our CAO for his first swing at the bat here on a day-long budget meeting with council.